So, hello everyone. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah? Great. So, my name is Björn and I am a PhD student at Linköping University here in Sweden. And I will present a paper that I'm working on together with some colleagues. Robert Thornberg, as you heard speaking before, Wänström, Marlene Bjärehed, all of them at Linköping University. And then we also cooperate with Gianluca Gini at University of Padua in Italy. So let's start with the title of this paper, that is Associations between Bystanders' Reactions to Peer Victimization and Student-Teacher Relationship Quality, Moral Disengagement, and Defender Self-Efficacy, a structural equation approach. In other words, we are interested in how moral disengagement, defender self-efficacy, and student-teacher relationship quality are related to how students behave when they witness peers being victimized. And I will now start by giving some background and context. Then I will say a few words about what we have done and what we have found so far. And finally, I will say a few words about the implications and limitations of our study. In peer victimization event, there are always one or more students who take the role as victimizers, as well as one or more students who take the role as victims. But in peer victimization, there are also other participants involved as well. And we used to call them bystanders. And this might be a little bit of repetition from Robert's presentation, but I think that might be beneficial to have some repetition. So first we have the assistants who join in with the victimizer and harass the victim. And we also have the reinforcers who don't really join in and harass the victim directly, but who are in different way act so that the victimizers are reinforced or encouraged to continue. And these two roles, assistants and reinforcers, can be called pro-aggressive roles as they facilitate victimization. And then we have two more roles, outsiders who remain passive or uninvolved. For example, they move away from the situation, or if they stay, they watch the situation without sticking up either for the victimizer or for the victim. And finally, we have the defenders who defend or support or help the victim somehow. For example, they might go and get a teacher that in turn can confront the victimizers, or they might directly intervene in the situations themselves. For example, by saying something to the victimizers, like, stop, don't do that. So in peer victimization, one can say that there are at least 6 kinds of potential roles, or participant roles, as they were labeled in an early Finnish study by Kristina Salmevali, as you also mentioned before. And here in our paper, we are focusing on 3 of the bystander roles, namely on the reinforcers, on the outsiders, and on the defenders. But why is it important to put focus on the bystanders, really? Well, research has consistently shown that bystanders are most often present in peer victimization situations. Some observational studies even suggest that they are present in up to 80 or 90% of all cases. And even though bystanders are neither victimizers nor victims, they have been identified as a key element to focus on in peer victimization prevention work, because studies have found that peer victimization is generally more common in school contexts characterized by pro-aggressive bystander behavior, as compared to contexts in which the bystanders are more inclined to stick up for the victim. The problem is, though, that bystanders seldom take the defender role. Most of them instead stay passive, and some of them even assist or reinforce the victimizers. And therefore, we believe it's important to learn more about underlying factors that influence how students react or behave when they witness peers being victimized. What makes students reinforce the victimizers, and what makes them defend the victim. So I will now turn to the 3 factors that we included in this paper, 3 factors that we think explain some of the variability in bystander behavior. The first one is moral disengagement, which is a term from social psychology, and more specifically from Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory. So Albert Bandura realized that most inhumane acts are perpetrated by people who in other aspects of their lives can be compassionate and can be humane. So most people who behave in an inhumane way still have some kind of inner moral standard or moral compass. And if you go against that standard, you might need to somehow justify or rationalize that transgression in order to feel okay with yourself. And to explain this, Bandura developed the concept of moral disengagement, which can be defined as a person's tendency to disengage from humane acts and instead commit inhumane or harming actions against other people without feeling guilt. And more specifically, he identified 8 different ways or mechanisms through which it is possible to disengage from one's moral standard so that you don't feel guilty. And you can see them all here. I will not go through them one by one in detail. We don't have time for that. But for example, euphemistic labeling means that you label the harmful act in a way that makes it sound less negative or more respectable. Students might say, for example, that, okay, I did that to him or her, but it was just a joke, or I was just kidding. And another example is dehumanization, which means stripping the victim of human qualities or somehow degrade him or her, so that it becomes easy to perceive the victim as deserving of victimization. And then we also included the factor defender self-efficacy, which is also a concept stemming from Bandura's social cognitive theory, actually. Here it was simply defined as a student's belief in his or her ability to successfully intervene in peer victimization situations. And finally, our third factor that we included was student-teacher relationship quality, here defined as the degree of caring, warm, supportive, and respectful student-teacher relationships and interaction patterns. So these were our 3 factors that we included, and that we think explain some of the variability in students' bystander behavior. So what is our aim? I have already touched this, of course, but concisely, our aim is to explore potential pathways that link moral disengagement, defender self-efficacy, and student-teacher relationship quality to different types of bystander behaviors. So what did we do to investigate this? We collected self-report survey data from more than 1,500 Swedish students in 4th grade. And when you are in 4th grade in Sweden, by the way, you are about 10 years old. So on tablets, they responded to our web-based questionnaire, and in most cases, they responded on a 7-point Likert scale, indicating the number that best corresponded to their actual attitudes or experiences. And when we had collected the data, we applied a structural equation modeling approach. Just a few words about this, often abbreviated SEM, structural equation modeling. SEM is a kind of very general statistical modeling technique that has its origins in both regression analysis of observed variables, but also in factor analysis of unobserved or latent variables. And SEM is also confirmatory rather than exploratory, in that the researcher has to predetermine the relationships in the model to be tested. So let's look at our 6 variables. All of them were calculated by averaging scores from more than 1 questionnaire items. So student-teacher relationship quality was made up of 9 questionnaire items, defender self-efficacy of 6 items, defender and outsider bystander behavior were made up of 5 items each, reinforces behavior by 2 items, and moral disengagement was made up of 18 items in the questionnaire. And then we also had to assume a certain set of causal relationships between these variables. We set the 3 types of bystander behaviors as dependent variables, here on the right side. And we set student-teacher relationship quality as an independent variable, which we thought could affect the dependent variables. But we also thought that these relationships would be mediated by moral disengagement and defender self-efficacy. So our model could be visualized as this. First 2 arrows pointing from student-teacher relationship quality to moral disengagement and defender self-efficacy. And in turn, 3 arrows pointing from moral disengagement to each of the bystander behaviors, and the same thing for defender self-efficacy. So this was what we wanted to examine in our SEM model. And what we found was this. The numbers that you see here indicate standardized coefficients, and all of them were highly significant. We can see that student-teacher relationship quality was positively associated with defender self-efficacy and negatively associated with moral disengagement. Moral disengagement in turn was positively associated with reinforcer and outsider bystander behavior, and negatively associated with defender bystander behavior. And in contrast, defender self-efficacy was positively associated with defender behavior, and it was negatively associated with outsider and reinforcer bystander behavior. And in addition to just checking the standardized coefficients, it's important in SEM to also check some fit statistics for the whole analysis or the whole model. And some popular indices to check is CFI, RMSEA, and SIMR. And all of the numbers here indicate that the model had an acceptable or even good fit to the data. And therefore, we conclude that it seems like all 3 factors are related to and maybe could influence bystanders' behavior in peer-victimization. The model had an acceptable fit, and all standardized coefficients were highly significant. Some of them were even medium or strong in effect size. So our results suggest that students who experience positive relationships with their teachers do not morally disengage as much as students who have poorer relationships. Positive relationships were also related to higher defender self-efficacy. And students high in moral disengagement were more likely to reinforce peer victimization. Students low in defender self-efficacy were more likely to stay passive, whereas students high in defender self-efficacy were more likely to defend or support or help the victims. Just some words then on the limitations of our paper and on what is needed in future research. First of all, it's important to emphasize that even though the model fitted the data well, it is not that the model has been proven true ultimately. There might be another models. There might be other competitive models that fit the data as well, or even better. And second, SEM isn't a technique that magically transforms correlational data into causal conclusions. For example, we assume that student-teacher relationship quality would affect moral disengagement, but it might, of course, be that moral disengagement also influences student-teacher relationship quality, so it might be a bidirectional relationship between them. And third, it is of course likely that many factors contribute to explain variability in bystanders' reactions to peer victimization. Researchers, as you know, more and more consider peer victimization to be a social complex phenomenon which need to be understood and investigated as an ecological system. And therefore many relevant perspectives and factors were certainly excluded here in this paper. In terms of future research, there are still many things that can be done. One crucial issue is to understand causality among our included variables. And another issue is, of course, to learn about how moral disengagement, defender self-efficacy, and student-teacher relationship quality could be included together in peer victimization prevention programs. And consequently, different approaches are needed in future research, including ecological, longitudinal, and interventional approaches. And last of all, I just want to mention that we have an ongoing research project at Linköping University, in which we will continue to follow these participants for several years, so they will respond to our questionnaire on 5 occasions, once every year. So I hope that we in the future could come up with some even more interesting results with longitudinal data, which can further increase our understanding of underlying factors that influence students' bystander behavior. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.